This is the World Organic News Supplemental Episode 2, John Moore reporting. Take 2. Apologies for the last effort. For some reason all the edited parts got stuck in wrong places, so we'll start again. This supplemental episode is a reading of a piece I wrote called In Defence of Modern Yeomanry, Small Mixed Farms as the Answer. It gives the ethos and understanding of where we're coming from at the blog and on the podcast, but doesn't really fit with the weekly update. In Defence of Modern Yeomanry, Small Mixed Farms as the Answer. Given the nature of agriculture in this country and the effects of rising populations both here and globally, it is time to re-examine the virtues of a stable, productive yeoman farming sector. In the global south and through its myriad advocates, this sector is often referred to as the peasantry, but reimagining it and seeing it for what it truly is, a free landholding eco-management sector, brings many possibilities. Let us look at the evolution of the language used to describe this sector. When I was at school, these smallholders were referred to as subsistence farmers, devoid of the wonders of science, which in this case meant fossil fuel machinery and fossil fuel-derived agrochemicals. These individuals were depicted as living from hand to mouth. This description would be better applied to the day labourers of the growing cities. Out of the turmoil of the 1960s and 1970s, there arose a movement in the West where individuals returned to subsistence farming, but they called it self-sufficiency. John Seymour, the father of the modern self-sufficiency movement, was my first contact with this idea. These early pioneers went back to the ideas of organic farming and replicated the rotations of pre-industrial eras. A good enough starting point, but this involved much physical labour. Another pioneer was John Jeavons, who developed the grow bio-intensive method, and this took physical input to a new height and disassociated animals from plants in the process. More on this later. What these pioneers showed was the viability of a small farm, large garden idea within the agricultural sector. In general, there are 5 major contributions small farms make to society as a whole. 5 important contributions we have lost with the aggregation of land holdings. These can be reinstated with the right planning policies and an ability to think in a systems-focused way rather than a scientifically deductive way. The 5 areas are food security, productivity and conservation, biodiversity, non-GMO sanctuaries, and climate moderation. These 5 benefits are interconnected and interdependent. Increased food security is based upon the more productive aspects of systems-based approaches utilising locally adapted strains of plants and animals. These are open-pollinated, non-GMO plants that are adapted to the local microclimates in which they evolved. Being open-pollinated, they have a wider variety of type. This means they are more adaptable to changes in climate conditions than the narrowly developed GMO or even Green Revolution seed types. Being of a smaller size than agribusiness units, the need to conserve and indeed grow the soil is paramount. This resource is limited, and it is husbanded carefully to ensure long-term viability when it cannot be flooded with chemical fertilisers. Small farms carry more tree cover than large monocultures, and this assists to moderate the microclimate and lessen extremes of weather. The more three-dimensional nature of small farms both increases their productivity and provides more niches for birds, beneficial insects and native species. These benefits may not have been obvious to the original back to the land types in the 1960s and 1970s, but they quickly became apparent. These are areas open to research and experimentation. In the same way, going back to wind generators in the 1970s meant using the technology of the 1930s, when widespread electrification ended any development of that technology, so too did a return to small-scale organic agriculture mean a return to old systems. The problem for both the early organic movement and the rediscovery of renewable energies was the best and brightest minds had been applied in the interim to the more conventional ways of doing things. This left a gap in research, hypotheses to investigate and curiosity in these fields. The return of these older technologies created outcomes that worked, yet both were ready for new thinking. Fukuoka in Japan is one such example of this new way of thinking. Having been brought up in a rural area, he remembered the ways of life before chemical agriculture and its insistence on full-year production. He also saw the increases in costs and debts farmers had to carry. During his time as an agricultural officer, he was engaged in the fruitless task of destroying every rice plant that sprouted outside the official growing season in an attempt to eradicate disease. It was during this time he spotted the ways grasses sprout and grow in relationship with the seasons. He also remembered his childhood winters when farmers would spend their days hunting rabbits at their leisure. These two forces coalesced into a moment of satori for Fukuoka, and from there he developed his natural farming or do-nothing system, of which we will discuss more later. Other examples of this new way of thinking based upon observation of natural systems rather than individual parts of nature are permaculture and the change underground system. All three rely upon moments of satori, whilst observing the cycles and flows of nature. The beauty of these systems is that they rely upon natural processes to create harvestable surpluses, and they do so by allowing nature to do the work. The physical and mechanical labour requirements are considerably less than either conventional or revived organic systems, and their productivity is equal to or higher than chemical-based systems. This is especially so when wastage through transportation is factored into the equation. In contrast, the development of chemical agriculture with artificial fertilisers, herbicides and pesticides is reliant upon research focusing on one particular part of a problem. To be fair, huge amounts of food have been produced with this system, but the unintended consequences have been extreme. Loss of locally evolved open-pollinated seed stocks, depopulation of rural areas leading to huge city slums, soil degradation, obesity in the West, concentration in the ownership of land, seed production and property rights over parts of nature are just a few of these unintended consequences. There are other benefits small farms bring over agribusiness enterprises. They have, on average, a far greater number of trees per unit area of land, and these are predominantly fruit trees, which increases the production per unit area. And production per unit area is where small farms excel. Intercropping, closer spacing and continual attention all result in higher outputs. It is unlikely small farms can compete with broadacre grain production, but they don't have to either. Their competitive advantage lies in the proximity of the farmer to the crop. An acre of land can easily be worked by one person to produce vegetables, large grains such as maize, potatoes, soft fruit and tree fruits. By breaking the area into smaller plots and using a greenhouse to start seedlings off, and all the waste recycled through ruminants, swine or worm beds, it is possible to produce anything from 4 to 16 times the output of the same acre worked with a tractor, chemical sprays and inorganic fertilisers. Even the space between rows set aside for the tractor tyres is used productively in smaller units. The closer planting regimes almost eliminate weed competition. All byproducts not used directly for human consumption are cycled back through the system to increase soil fertility. Added to these benefits are the low capital costs, no tractor or implements, no fertiliser or pesticide costs, and a more efficient use of water. All this can be done with the Seymour or Jeevens systems with much manual labour. Using Fukuoka's permaculture or change underground systems, the manual labour component is much reduced. This leaves the producer so much more time to plan, observe, interact with the systems, and increase understanding of what is actually happening on their small piece of land. If instead of an acre, 2 were put under production in this system and another 3 set aside for orchards, sheep and or goats, or even a house cow, the producer could feed themselves, their family and 30 other households. An average golf course of 140 acres could therefore support 28 farming families and feed 840 other households. By fiddling with land sizes and sticking to 2 acres, rabbits and poultry, 2,100 households could be fed a balanced, varied, seasonally appropriate diet. Probably some combination between 2 and 5 acre units would achieve the best outcome. Jeevans' grow bio-intensive system relies upon plants alone. As a consequence, something like 75% of all crops grown are used to create compost and thereby improve the soil structure, humus content and strength. Now this is perfectly acceptable if you want to put in the work. Each garden bed in the system is double dug each year. So rather than using natural processes to enhance the soil, it relies upon the application of human energy to create a soil structure. This and the reliance upon plants alone for the apparent reason that animal production takes up valuable food that could be fed to humans seems to me an unnecessarily self-imposed limit. If we take the 75% of production used for compost creation, feed it through ruminants, pigs, rabbits or poultry, the compost process takes only 24 hours and provides more options of meat, milk, fibre and fur. The increased level of manual labour involved also reduces the time available for systems observation and general creative thinking. In the end, though, a choice to follow this system is not unreasonable. It just has to suit the temperament of the individuals employing it. The Fukuoka system, do nothing, comes directly from its cultural heritage. It is Zen gardening without the rakes and stones. Philosophy can be applied to all forms of food production. I will describe one aspect to best illustrate it. It is in the growing of grains on small scale that the system both evolved and is best understood. What Fukuoka observed was the cycles of summer and winter grasses in the wild. As the summer grasses seeded off and died down, the winter grasses pushed through the remnants of the summer. The seeds from the summer grasses lay dormant until the process repeated itself in spring. From these observations, Fukuoka developed a system of grain production suitable to his locale. In a field that had been ploughed once, he sowed clover. Once the clover was established, he broadcast rice seeds over the paddock. He then flooded the paddocks as per tradition, but only until the clovers had died off. He then drained the field and allowed the rice to grow. Once the rice reached 3 inches in height, he ran ducks over it to trim the rice and force it to tiller. The ducks were then removed. The paddock was left alone until 2 weeks prior to harvest. At this time, the paddock was broadcast with barley or millet seeds. Once they had sprouted, the rice was harvested, threshed, and the straw returned to the paddock. The winter grains then pushed up through the straw and the cycle continued. It is possible to adapt this system to any grain rotation you like. It is usable on any scale from garden bed to a 10,000 acre paddock. It is also usable for vegetable or flower production. It is simply a matter of understanding the life cycles of each plant. Applied to orchards, Fukuoka planted a legume tree to every 8 fruit trees and undersowed the orchards with vegetables, grains and or flowers. His method can be summed up as no bare ground, no digging, no weeding. Permaculture and the change underground systems sit somewhere between Fukuoka and Jeevans. They both tend to rely more on animal manures than either of the two systems, but use the Fukuoka understanding of natural cycles to produce surpluses, rather than relying on spade work. From all these systems, it is possible to find one that meets the temperament of the individual yeoman, and for further development to occur. With a method in hand and available land, it is possible to localise food production and increase both general health and our understanding of our place in nature. So we have the means to reinstate a stable, viable yeomanry. To do this requires some political will, but more than that, it requires the information on how to do this to be disseminated, so that those drawn to this life have a map. There are as many ways of running a small area farm as there are individuals, each with their own biases, research questions, drives and interpretations. The way of the yeoman is not just a way of making money, nor of saving the planet. It is a return in some sense to our Neolithic roots, to a time when people had a deep sense of the flows of nature, the cycles of the year and the dignity of each individual. And surely this is a vision worth working towards.